The air in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was thick with the scent of money and magnolias. It was a physical presence, a perfumed weight composed of $1,000 floral arrangements, rivers of vintage champagne, and the hushed reverence of old New York society gathered to celebrate itself. Danielle Carter stood near the edge of the dais, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. She felt the 100 pairs of eyes on her, their gazes a mix of curiosity, envy, and the polite, professional appraisal reserved for an outsider who had somehow breached the fortress. In her simple, elegant, midnight blue gown, she was an island of quiet composure in a sea of glittering diamonds and ostentatious couture. She was here to accept the Vanguard Award for Philanthropy, a recognition of her foundation's work in funding STEM education for underprivileged youth. It was the culmination of a decade of relentless work, a public validation she had once craved and now regarded with a detached sense of irony. Reputation, in this room, was everything. It was a currency more valuable than the stocks and bonds that funded their gilded lives. Danielle Carter, the presenter's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, echoed through the ballroom, a true titan of industry, a self-made visionary whose commitment to giving back is as formidable as her business acumen. A wave of polite applause rippled through the crowd. Danielle took a steadying breath and began her walk toward the stage, each step measured and confident. The path was short, only 20 feet, but it felt like the final mile of a marathon she had been running her entire life. She passed tables of whispering socialites and stoic financiers, their faces a gallery of practiced neutrality. Halfway to the stage, a figure stepped into her path, blocking her way with the casual authority of a man who believed the world arranged itself for his convenience. It was Richard Island. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his tuxedo tailored with surgical precision. He was a board member of the foundation, a pillar of the community, and the architect of her oldest and deepest pain. He smiled, a thin, predatory slash that did not reach his cold, blue eyes. The people at the nearest tables fell silent, sensing the shift in the room's temperature. "Danielle," he murmured, his voice low and intimate, yet carrying with chilling clarity to those nearby, "Congratulations. It's a remarkable achievement." "Thank you, Richard," she replied, her own voice a placid surface beneath which a storm churned. He leaned closer, the scent of expensive cologne and malice clinging to him. "It's astonishing what some people will do to rewrite history," he whispered, the words like shards of glass. "Some of us remember the truth. Danielle, we remember what happened to my son." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. For a fleeting second, the opulent ballroom dissolved, replaced by the ghost image of twisted metal, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, and the deafening silence that had followed the screech of tires. 10 years. It had been 10 years, and the ghost of that day was still standing in her path, wearing a tuxedo and a condescending smile. The people at the surrounding tables exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard it. They weren't meant to, but they had. And now they were witnesses to a quiet declaration of war. Danielle's composure was her shield and her sword. She did not flinch. She did not recoil. She held his gaze, her dark eyes unreadable, and offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement, not of his accusation, but of the chasm that would forever lie between them. Then, she gracefully stepped around him and continued to the stage, the applause swelling again, this time laced with a new undercurrent of speculation and suspense. As she accepted the heavy crystal award, her hands were perfectly steady. She smiled for the cameras, a brilliant, camera-ready smile that revealed nothing of the wound he had just ripped open. The audience saw a woman at the pinnacle of her success, Richard Island saw a ghost he was determined to exorcise. But Danielle Carter, holding the symbol of her hard-won victory, knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning. Richard had just reminded her that some debts are never paid, and some wars are never truly over. He had drawn his line in the sand, and she, in her silent, dignified ascent to the stage, had just decided she was finally ready to cross it. The first rays of dawn were slicing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Danielle's office, painting streaks of gold across the polished mahogany of her desk. From the 60th floor, Atlanta was a sprawling circuit board of light and possibility, a city she had, in many ways, conquered. This office was her sanctuary and her command center, a testament to a decade spent transmuting grief into ambition. Carter Global Logistics, the company she had built from a single truck and a $50,000 loan from her grandmother, was now a multi-billion-dollar empire, a behemoth in a world dominated by old men and older money. He knew exactly what he was doing. Marcus, her executive assistant and closest confidant, placed a steaming mug of black coffee on her desk. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 30s, whose calm demeanor masked a mind as sharp as a scalpel. He was more than an employee. He was her private investigator, her strategist, and the keeper of her secrets. Of course. He did, Danielle said, her voice quiet. She hadn't slept. After the gala, she had returned to her penthouse, the Crystal Award sitting on her mantel like a silent accusation. It wasn't a random comment. It was a calculated strike. In public. In front of the people whose opinions are supposed to matter. The whispers started before you even left the ballroom. Marcus confirmed, his gaze serious. The old guard loves a good scandal. What did he mean? What happened to his son? It's all they'll be talking about for weeks. Danielle swiveled her chair to face the window, watching the city wake up. He's been a shadow for 10 years. Marcus, a whisper at board meetings I wasn't invited to. A deal that inexplicably falls through. A banker who suddenly gets cold feet. Little cuts. A death by 1,000 paper cuts. But this was different. This was him stepping out of the shadows. The ghost of that day was always with her. Leo Island, her best friend since childhood. They were inseparable. Two halves of the same whole. He was the dreamer, the artist, the one who saw beauty in everything. She was the pragmatist, the protector, the one who navigated the world for both of them. The night of the accident. They were driving back from a weekend trip, celebrating their college graduation. A deer had darted onto the slick, rain-soaked road. She had swerved, the car had hydroplaned, spun out of control, and hit an ancient oak tree. She had woken up in the hospital with a broken arm and a concussion. Leo was gone. The investigation was thorough and conclusive. The police report cited excessive speed for the conditions and an unavoidable animal collision. There were no drugs, no alcohol. Danielle was cleared of all wrongdoing. A tragic accident. The official report called it. But Richard Island had never accepted it. In his grief, he had needed a villain, and he had chosen her. He refused to believe it was a random act of fate. It had to be someone's fault. It had to be Danielle's. His hatred has been the fuel in my engine for a long time, Danielle admitted, her reflection a faint silhouette against the brightening sky. Every time I thought about giving up, I'd hear his voice in my head, telling me I didn't deserve to be happy, that I had stolen his son's future. So I built this. She gestured around the vast, silent office. I built an empire so big, so powerful, that his whispers couldn't reach me anymore. I thought if I became untouchable, I could finally outrun Leo's ghost. And have you? Marcus asked gently. Danielle turned back to him, her eyes clear and resolute. "Last night. He proved that I haven't. He proved that no matter how high I climb, he will always be there, trying to pull me back down into that wreckage." She took a sip of her coffee, the heat a welcome shock to her system. "He wants a war. Marcus. He's been fighting a quiet one for a decade. Last night, he made it public." "So, what's our move?" Marcus asked. The hour was unspoken, but understood. Her fight was his fight. A new kind of energy was beginning to course through Danielle, displacing the exhaustion. It was the familiar thrum of strategy, of a problem to be solved, a battle to be won. "For years, I've avoided him. I've gone out of my way to operate in different circles, to build my world so far from his that they would never intersect. I was wrong. The only way to get rid of a ghost is to face it." She stood up and walked over to a large digital whiteboard that covered one wall. With a few taps, she pulled up a file. It was a dossier on Richard Island and his business holdings. His crown jewel was his position as the director and primary shareholder of the flagship Sterling Motors showroom in Manhattan, one of the most profitable luxury car dealerships in the world. "Carter Global is expanding its East Coast operations," she said, her voice crisp and decisive. "We need a new fleet of executive vehicles, at least a dozen to start, with a potential long-term contract worth hundreds of millions." She zoomed in on the Sterling Motors logo. "Our two top choices are Sterling and a competitor. It's time for a final, in-person evaluation." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "You're going to walk into his showroom after what he did last night?" "Yes," Danielle said, a steely glint in her eyes. "But he won't be seeing Danielle Carter, the girl he thinks he broke 10 years ago. He'll be meeting Danielle Carter, CEO. I'm going to face him on my terms, in his kingdom, surrounded by the symbols of the very success he believes I don't deserve. I thought my power would be a shield. It's time to see if it can be a sword." It was a calculated risk, a deliberate provocation. She wanted to look him in the eye, not as the grieving friend of his son, but as a potential client with immense power. She wanted to force him to choose between his personal vendetta and his professional obligations. It was a test, for him and for herself. Had she truly built a fortress? Or was it just a house of cards, ready to collapse at the first breath of the past? "Book me a flight to New York," she commanded, "and arrange a visit to the Sterling Motors showroom for tomorrow afternoon. Unannounced. I want to see how they treat a walk-in." "Understood," Marcus said, already tapping on his tablet. "But, Danielle, be careful. A wounded animal is most dangerous when it feels cornered." Danielle looked at the image of Richard Island on the screen, his smug, powerful face smiling out from a Society magazine photo. "He's not the one who's wounded, Marcus," she said softly. "He's the one who's been holding the knife." The Sterling Motors showroom on Park Avenue was a cathedral of chrome and glass. Sunlight streamed through two-story windows, glinting off the polished hoods of vehicles that cost more than most people's homes. The air was still and cool, smelling of Italian leather and quiet entitlement. It was Richard Island's domain, a carefully curated world where value was measured in dollars and pedigree. Danielle entered alone, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue sheath dress and low heels. She carried no designer handbag, wore no ostentatious jewelry. Her appearance was a deliberate choice, understated, professional, and designed to be underestimated. She wanted to be a blank slate onto which they could project their assumptions. Richard was standing near the centerpiece display, a magnificent Bentley Continental GT in a deep, lustrous black. He was speaking with a sales associate, a sharp-faced blonde woman named Margaret Thompson. He saw Danielle the moment she walked in. and a flicker of something recognition. Contempt. Surprise crossed his face before being replaced by a mask of professional indifference. He had prepared for this. The confrontation at the gala had been his opening salvo. This was to be the main assault. He didn't approach her. Instead, he watched as she began to browse, his eyes following her every move. Danielle ignored him, focusing on the cars. Her posture relaxed, her interest genuine. She spent 20 minutes moving through the showroom, pausing to admire a Rolls-Royce Ghost, running a hand over the supple leather interior of an Aston Martin. The entire time, not a single employee approached her. They took their cues from their director, who stood like a silent sentinel, his disapproval radiating across the marble floor. Finally, Danielle made her way to the Bentley at the center of the room. She was examining its flawless finish when Richard decided to make his move. He glided towards her, his smile as polished and cold as the car she was admiring. Margaret trailed in his wake like a loyal acolyte. "May I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with a politeness that was more insulting than open hostility. "Yes," Danielle replied, turning to face him, her own expression pleasantly neutral. "I'm interested in this Continental GT. I'd like to know more about the available packages and the current delivery timeline." Richard exchanged a look with Margaret, a small, shared smirk that spoke volumes. "The Continental GT," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "An excellent choice. Of course, it is one of our premier models. We find our most valued clients appreciate a certain heritage. It's about more than just money. You see, it's about a legacy." The coded language was clear. "You are not one of us. You have no heritage we recognize." "I understand," Danielle said calmly. "My company is looking to acquire a fleet of 12 vehicles for our new executive team. This model is at the top of our list." The mention of a fleet purchase should have sent any dealership director into a frenzy of accommodating service. Richard didn't even blink. He had his script. "A fleet," he mused, tapping a finger on his chin. "How ambitious. Of course. A corporate purchase of that size is a complex transaction. It requires extensive financial vetting, proof of corporate standing, board resolutions. It's a process designed to ensure the integrity of our brand." His staff, now subtly gathering at a respectful distance, nodded in unison. Margaret chimed in, her voice pitched to carry, "We have to be so careful. The Sterling brand is synonymous with a certain class of individual. We can't have our vehicles associated with just anyone." The insult was designed to be systemic. It wasn't just him. It was the entire culture of his showroom. A wealthy, older couple, the Whitmores, who had been examining a nearby Rolls-Royce, paused to watch the unfolding drama. Mrs. Whitmore whispered to her husband, just loud enough to be overheard, "He's right. You know, you have to protect the brand." The atmosphere was becoming suffocating, a web of microaggressions and polite prejudice. They were building a case against her, brick by brick, creating a narrative where she was the unreasonable one, the aggressor, for simply trying to be a customer. "I have all the necessary documentation," Danielle said, her patience a deep, unshakable well. "I'd be happy to provide it to your finance department." Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Documentation," he said, as if the word itself was ridiculous. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this isn't a Honda dealership down the street. We don't just run a credit check and hand over the keys. Our clientele is a community. We know them, they know us. It's a relationship built on years of trust." The trap was sprung. He was no longer just insulting her. He was publicly invalidating her, positioning her as an outsider, trying to force her way into a world where she didn't belong. The other customers in the showroom either looked away, feigning interest in the cars, or watched with a kind of detached amusement. Their complicity was a weapon in Richard's arsenal. "So, you're refusing to sell me a car?" Danielle asked, her voice still level, her question cutting through the pretense. "I am trying to save us both a great deal of time and potential embarrassment," Richard replied, his voice hardening. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "I've seen this before. People come in here with big talk, trying to project an image that doesn't align with their reality. It never ends well." He was baiting her, trying to provoke a reaction, an outburst that would justify his prejudice. He wanted her to get angry, to raise her voice, to prove him right. But Danielle refused to play his game. She simply held his gaze and said, "I see." Then, she pulled out her phone. "Perhaps a call to your corporate headquarters would help clarify your sales policy." The threat was implicit and powerful. Richard's face tightened. He hadn't expected this. He had expected her to retreat, humiliated. "There's no need for that," he snapped, his composure finally beginning to fray. He turned to Margaret. "Margaret, please escort this individual to the door. She is disrupting our business and bothering our legitimate clients." Margaret hesitated, a flicker of unease in her eyes, but her loyalty to Richard won out. "Ma'am," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "if you'll please come with me." Danielle stood her ground. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. "I came here to do business, and I believe Mr. Jonathan Sterling, your CEO, would be very interested to hear about the unique customer service experience at his flagship Manhattan location." She had his name, not just the company, but the CEO himself. A direct hit. Richard's face paled. He had underestimated her. He had seen the woman from the gala, the girl from the accident, and had been blinded by his hatred. He had failed to see the formidable CEO standing before him, a woman who had clearly done her homework. The calculated risk was no longer hers. It was his. The trap he had so carefully laid was about to snap shut on its creator. The aftermath of the showroom confrontation was swift and silent. Danielle didn't need to call the CEO. The mere mention of his name was enough. The air in the dealership had shifted, the smug confidence replaced by a palpable panic. Richard, his face ashen, had stammered a weak apology and offered to have any salesperson she wanted assist her. Danielle had simply shaken her head, thanked him for his time, and walked out, leaving a crater of silent chaos in her wake. The fight, however, was just beginning. This was no longer just about Richard's personal animosity. It was about the systemic prejudice he had cultivated, the network of enablers that protected him. Back in her New York hotel suite, which now served as a temporary war room, Danielle and Marcus began to dismantle it. "He's insulated," Marcus reported, scrolling through data on his laptop. "He's been the director of that showroom for 15 years. His sales numbers are consistently the highest in the country. To the board, he's a golden goose. They're not going to touch him over a customer complaint, even from you." "Then we give them a reason to," Danielle said. "His numbers are too good. Dig into the dealership's finances. I want to know every dollar in, every dollar out. Check his expense reports, his supplier contracts, his commission structures. A man that arrogant and entitled always leaves a trail." While Marcus initiated a deep dive into the financial underbelly of Sterling Motors Manhattan, Danielle launched her own quiet but ruthless campaign. She began with a series of calls to her contacts in the business world, fellow CEOs, and executives who maintained corporate fleets. She didn't mention the incident. Not directly. Instead, she spoke of cultural alignment and brand integrity. "We're reassessing our vehicle partnerships," she'd say over the phone to the CEO of a major investment bank, "looking for companies whose values reflect a commitment to modern, inclusive business practices. Sterling has been great, but we're exploring all our options." The message was subtle but unmistakable. The seeds of doubt were planted. Within days, Sterling's corporate office began fielding calls from other high-value clients, asking pointed questions about their diversity and inclusion policies. The pressure was building, a slow, methodical squeeze. Days turned into a week. Marcus, working with a team of forensic accountants, found what they were looking for. "It's a classic kickback scheme," he explained. Projecting spreadsheets onto the suite's large television screen, Richard has an exclusive contract with a local auto detailing company for all showroom vehicles. The company is owned by his brother-in-law. They're charging Sterling triple the market rate and kicking back 40% to a shell corporation registered in Richard's wife's maiden name. "It's more than that," Marcus continued, pulling up another file. "He's been using his position to sabotage competitors. We found a pattern. Whenever a rival dealership is close to landing a major corporate account, an anonymous tip gets sent to the city's building inspectors or the fire department. They get tied up in red tape for weeks, and Richard swoops in to close the deal. He's also rewarding allies. Dealerships that recommend his location get favorable terms on vehicle transfers. He's built a network based on shared views and mutual backscratching." It was the proof she needed. This wasn't just a personal failing. It was a pattern of corruption and unethical business practices. Richard's prejudice wasn't a bug. It was a feature of how he operated. As the evidence mounted, Danielle felt a cold, satisfying certainty growing within her. This was no longer just about justice for herself. It was about cleansing a system. But as her focus sharpened, a voice of caution emerged from her past. She was on a video call with her grandmother, Eleanor, the woman whose faith and $50,000 loan had been the seed from which Carter Global had grown. Eleanor was in her 80s, her face a roadmap of a life lived with wisdom and grace, her eyes still sharp and perceptive. "I saw the news about that man at the gala. Danny," she said, her voice warm but laced with concern. "And I've been hearing whispers about what you're doing to that car company. You have a look in your eye I haven't seen in a long time. Not since after the accident." "I'm just protecting my company, Grandma," Danielle replied, trying to keep her tone light. Eleanor was not fooled. There's a difference between justice and vengeance. Child, justice is about restoring balance. Vengeance is about inflicting pain. You be careful you don't lose yourself in this fight. Don't let that man's hatred turn your heart to stone." The words lingered long after the call ended. Was her grandmother right? Was this quest for justice morphing into something colder? Something more personal? She thought of Richard's face at the gala. The pure, undiluted venom in his eyes. He had started this. He had nursed this hatred for a decade. She was simply finishing it. The thought gave her comfort. But a small, persistent part of her wondered if Eleanor had seen a truth she was unwilling to admit to herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by an urgent call from Marcus. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tight. "I got a hit from a source inside a private investigation firm he used years ago. An old, disgruntled employee. He sent me a file. It's the report Richard commissioned right after the accident." Marcus forwarded the document. Danielle opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. The screen filled with page after page of text. A twisted monument to a father's grief curdled into madness. The document was over 100 pages long, bound in the sterile blue cover of a professional investigative report, dated just 6 months after Leo's death. but the contents were anything but professional. It was a manifesto of hate, a meticulously constructed fiction, designed to prove a conclusion Richard Island had already reached. Danielle read, her blood turning to ice. The report was filled with fabricated witness statements. A supposed truck driver who claimed he saw her car driving erratically moments before the crash. A fictitious local resident who swore she'd heard them arguing loudly at a gas station an hour earlier. These people didn't exist. Their statements were pure invention, designed to paint Danielle as reckless and unstable. There were twisted interpretations of real evidence. The police report had noted her initial shock and disorientation at the scene. The private investigator's report framed this as evidence of guilt and deception. Her grief-stricken silence in the days following the funeral was presented not as trauma, but as the cold calculation of someone hiding a terrible secret. But the most damning part, the part that made Danielle feel physically ill, was the motive the report invented. It alleged that she and Leo had been in a fierce business rivalry over a startup idea they'd developed in college. It claimed she was jealous of his charisma and connections, and that the accident was a deliberate act to eliminate a future competitor. It was a grotesque, monstrous lie, so far from the truth of their deep and unwavering friendship that it felt like a violation of his memory. This wasn't just a man who blamed her for a tragic accident. This was a man who had spent a decade and a significant portion of his fortune. The investigators' fees alone must have been astronomical to build an alternate reality in which she was a monster. His actions weren't about prejudice against a stranger in a showroom. They were the culmination of a deep, pathological vendetta against the person he held responsible for stealing his son's future. Her success wasn't just an irritation to him. It was a personal affront, a daily reminder of the life Leo would never have. Every building she built, every contract she won, was, in his mind, built on the foundation of his son's grave. The revelation was staggering. It recontextualized everything. The whispers, the sabotaged deals, the public humiliation at the gala. It was all part of a long, deliberate campaign to ruin her. He hadn't been waiting for an opportunity to strike. He had been actively creating them for 10 years. He's insane, Danielle breathed, leaning back in her chair, the hotel room feeling suddenly cold and confining. This is a sickness. It's more than that, Marcus said, his voice grim. It's a weapon. He's been shopping this report around for years to his inner circle, planting a narrative. This is why bankers get cold feet, why partners back out. He's been poisoning the well against you from the shadows, showing this evidence to anyone who will listen. A wave of cold fury washed over Danielle, eclipsing any doubt her grandmother's words had raised. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about survival. A man this obsessed, this willing to fabricate reality, would never stop, unless he was stopped. The annual Sterling Motors shareholder meeting is in 2 weeks, she said, her voice low and dangerous. We're going to buy a significant block of shares through a proxy company, enough to get me a spot on the agenda. What's the plan? Marcus asked. He's made this personal. So I will too, Danielle declared, her eyes fixed on the digital copy of the report, the monument to his madness. I'm going to present the board with a choice. They can have a director who engages in financial misconduct and ethical breaches, or they can maintain their partnership with Carter Global. But before I do that, I'm going to show them this. She gestured to the report. I'm going to expose his decade-long vendetta in front of the entire world. I'm not just going to get him fired. I'm going to destroy his reputation, his legacy, everything he holds dear. I'm going to show everyone the monster he really is. The moral ambiguity was gone, burned away by the white-hot certainty of her anger. He had tried to rewrite her history, to paint her as a villain in the story of her own life. Now, she would tell the truth, and that truth would be his undoing. The ghost she had been running from was not Leo's. It was Richard's, a specter of hatred and lies. And it was time to finally turn on the lights. Danielle's plan was a masterpiece of corporate warfare. In the 2 weeks leading up to the shareholder meeting, Marcus worked through a series of shell corporations to acquire a substantial, but not controlling, stake in Sterling Motors. It was enough to secure her a 5-minute slot on the agenda under the shareholder proposal section, officially listed as a presentation on corporate culture and brand risk. It was a Trojan horse. Her legal team and Marcus's investigators had packaged the evidence of Richard's financial misconduct and his anti-competitive practices into a damning, irrefutable dossier. The private investigator's report was the centerpiece, the emotional core of her attack. She was ready. Then, 3 days before the meeting, her phone rang. It was a number she hadn't seen in years, but one she recognized instantly. Clara Island, Leo's mother, Richard's ex-wife. After the divorce, years before the accident, Clara had moved to the West Coast and built a new life. She and Danielle had maintained a quiet, gentle connection, exchanging Christmas cards and the occasional email. Unlike Richard, Clara had never blamed Danielle. They had shared their grief. Two women who had loved Leo more than anything, finding a fragile solace in their mutual loss. Clara's voice was strained, thick with tears. I'm so sorry to call you like this. Clara, it's okay. What's wrong? Danielle's heart sank. She knew, instinctively, that this was Richard's doing. Richard called me, Clara sobbed, her words tumbling out in a rush of pain. He told me what you're planning to do at the shareholder meeting. He said you're going to bring up the accident, that you're going to exhume all the details, publicly, just to ruin him. The manipulation was breathtakingly cruel. He had taken Clara's grief, her most vulnerable point, and weaponized it against Danielle. He said you're turning our son's memory into a corporate weapon, Clara continued, her voice breaking. Danielle, please, I know what Richard has done. I know the kind of man he is. But I can't bear the thought of Leo's death being picked apart in a boardroom, used as a tool in a business fight. It was a tragedy. Don't let it become a spectacle. Please, I am begging you. Let our boy rest in peace. The plea struck Danielle with the force of a physical blow. The cold certainty she had felt for weeks began to crack. She looked at the dossier on her desk, the weapon she had so carefully assembled, and suddenly saw it through Clara's eyes. It wasn't just evidence. It was a violation, in her quest to destroy Richard. She was about to inflict immense pain on an innocent woman she cared for, the only other person on earth who understood the depth of her loss. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Vengeance is about inflicting pain. She had been so focused on Richard, on his monstrous obsession, that she had failed to see the collateral damage. Clara was the moral complication she hadn't anticipated, a second obstacle that was far more formidable than Richard's lies. Clara, Danielle said, her own voice thick with emotion. He's lying to you. That was never my intention. I was going to expose his corruption, his vendetta against me. But I would never disrespect Leo's memory like that. But you can't do one without the other, can you? Clara asked, her voice filled with a desperate, heartbreaking wisdom. His vendetta is wrapped up in Leo. You can't tell that story without telling ours. Please, Danielle, find another way. For Leo. For me. She hung up, leaving Danielle in a profound, suffocating silence. She was at a crossroads. She could proceed with her plan, a brutal, all-out assault that would guarantee victory but devastate Clara. Or she could pull back, disarm, and try to find another path, one that was more difficult, more skillful, and far riskier. Her rage warred with her compassion. Richard deserved to be exposed. He deserved to have his lies dragged into the light. But did Clara deserve to have her deepest wound torn open in the process? For the first time in weeks, Danielle felt doubt. The clear, righteous path she had been on had suddenly dissolved into a moral fog. To win, she had to become as ruthless as her enemy. But in doing so, she would betray the memory of the very person this fight was. In some twisted way, all about. She had a choice to make win at all costs, or win the right way, and she had only 3 days to figure out how. The air in the Sterling Motors boardroom was sterile and charged with the low hum of nervous energy. The long, polished table reflected the anxious faces of investors, board members, and executives. At the head of the table sat Jonathan Sterling, the CEO, his expression grim. Richard Island sat to his right, looking confident, almost smug. He believed his call to Clara had worked. He thought he had disarmed Danielle, leaving her with no choice but to retreat or face a moral backlash. He was wrong. Danielle sat near the opposite end of the table, flanked by Marcus and her chief legal counsel. She was the picture of calm, her file resting closed in front of her. When her item on the agenda came up, she walked to the podium at the front of the room, her presence commanding an immediate, expectant silence. The press, sequestered in a glass-enclosed gallery, aimed their cameras. She did not begin with an attack. Her voice was measured, her tone respectful. "Good morning. My name is Danielle Carter. For the past decade, my company, Carter Global Logistics, has been a proud partner of Sterling Motors. I've always admired this brand. It stands for excellence, for heritage, for an uncompromising commitment to quality." She paused, letting the words settle. Several board members nodded in appreciation. Richard watched her, a small, condescending smile on his face. "But a brand is more than just its product," Danielle continued, her voice gaining a new edge of authority. "It is the sum of its actions. It is its culture. And a culture that allows prejudice, corruption, and unethical behavior to fester is a liability. It is a cancer that, if left unchecked, will destroy even the strongest company from within." Richard could not contain himself. "With all due respect, Ms. Carter," he interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "we are here to discuss financials and strategy, not to listen to a lecture on business ethics from a logistics manager." It was the opening she had been waiting for. "You're right, Mr. Island," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Let's discuss things that are more concrete." She nodded to Marcus, the main screen behind her, which had displayed the Sterling Motors logo, flickered to life. The first document appeared evidence of the kickback scheme with his brother-in-law's detailing company, bank statements, invoices, a flowchart showing money moving into the shell corporation. Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Jonathan Sterling's face went rigid. "Let's talk about financial misconduct," Danielle said, as Marcus clicked to the next slide, which detailed the pattern of sabotage against his competitors, internal emails, timestamps of anonymous calls to city inspectors. Richard shot to his feet. "This is an outrage. These documents are forged. This is a malicious, personal attack." "Is it personal?" Richard Danielle asked, her voice cutting through his bluster. The room fell silent. She had used his first name. This was no longer just business. The final set of documents appeared on the screen. Not the full PI report she was keeping her promise to Clara, but carefully selected excerpts. The fabricated witness statements. The invented business rivalry. Enough to show the obsession without revealing the most painful details of the accident itself. For 10 years, Danielle said, her voice quiet, but ringing with the force of truth. Richard Island has engaged in a systematic campaign to destroy my career. Based on a private vendetta, he has used his position at this company as a weapon. This isn't a personal grievance I'm airing. This is a catastrophic corporate liability. Your director of North American operations has been making business decisions not based on what's best for Sterling Motors, but on a decade-old obsession. How many partners have you lost? How many deals have fallen through because of his personal poison? Your greatest asset is also your greatest risk. The boardroom was in chaos. Board members were shouting. Jonathan Sterling was trying to restore order. Richard, cornered and exposed, played his final, desperate card. He strode to the front of the room, his face a mask of righteous fury. He didn't deny the report. He embraced it. Everything I did as a father, he thundered, his voice cracking with emotion. The room quieted again, captivated by the raw drama. A father who lost his only son. And there's a reason for my conviction. A piece of evidence the police overlooked. A piece of evidence that proves what I have known in my heart for 10 years. From his briefcase, he pulled out a document. A high-quality forgery designed to look like a cell phone record. He projected it onto the screen. It purported to show a text message sent from Danielle's phone just seconds before the time of the crash. She was texting, Richard declared, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. She killed my son because she was looking at her phone. For a moment, the room was stunned into silence. The accusation was horrific. Danielle's credibility hung by a thread. The board looked from the document to her, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. This was his trap, his final, desperate lie. It was also the very thing she had anticipated. She remained perfectly still at the podium. I knew you would never let this go. Richard, she said, her voice soft, with a sorrow that was deeper than anger. I knew you would twist and invent and lie until the end. Which is why I came prepared. She looked at Marcus. He pressed a button on his laptop. A new audio file began to play, its sound filling the cavernous, silent room. It was a voice from the past, young, vibrant, and full of life. It was Leo. The recording was a voicemail, left on her phone just seconds before the crash. She had never listened to it. It had been downloaded by the police as evidence, and then buried in a file, too painful for her to ever revisit. Until now. Leo's laughter filled the boardroom. Hey, do you ignore that last text I just sent you about the route? Total brain freeze. I have a much better idea. I want to tell you something. Something important. In person. We need to talk when we get home. It's big. Call me back when you get this. Wait. No. Don't. Just focus on the road. I'll see you in an hour. The recording ended. But Leo's cheerful, loving voice hung in the air like a ghost. It did more than just prove her innocence. It proved she wasn't texting. It proved Leo himself had told her to focus on the road. And it revealed the true depth of Richard's delusion, the monstrous lengths to which his grief had driven him. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by a single, ragged sob from the back of the room. Richard Island stood frozen, his face a ruin. The fabricated document on the screen behind him was no longer a weapon. It was a testament to his lie. His ruin was not just professional. It was total, public, and absolute. The confrontation was over. The aftermath was swift and brutal. 2 security guards entered the boardroom, and quietly escorted a catatonic Richard Island from the premises. He didn't resist. He seemed to have collapsed inward. A building whose foundations had been dynamited. Jonathan Sterling, his face pale with fury and shame, immediately called for a recess and approached Danielle. "On behalf of this entire company," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I offer our deepest, most profound apology. What you have endured is unconscionable. We have failed you as a partner and as human beings." Danielle simply nodded, too emotionally drained to speak. The news of the confrontation exploded. By the time she and Marcus were in the car, leaving the Sterling Tower, headlines were already flashing across news sites. Sterling Motors, director ousted in shocking shareholder meeting. CEO Danielle Carter exposes decade-long vendetta. The story was everywhere. A viral firestorm of corporate intrigue and personal tragedy. But back in the quiet sanctuary of her hotel suite, Danielle felt none of the triumph she had expected. The cold fury that had driven her for weeks had evaporated, leaving behind a profound and aching emptiness. She had won. She had destroyed her tormentor, vindicated her name, and protected her company. But the victory felt hollow. The ghost she had set out to exorcise was gone. But the wound he had inflicted remained. She hadn't healed. She had just completed a successful amputation. She declined all interviews, issuing a single statement through her press office today. The truth came to light. "My focus now is on moving forward." She left New York that evening, retreating from the noise and the speculation, seeking the solace of her quiet home in Atlanta. The next morning, she made one final call. She flew to California, unannounced, and drove to the small, peaceful coastal town where Clara Island lived. She found her in her garden, tending to a bed of roses. Clara looked up as Danielle approached, her eyes filled with a weary understanding. News of the meeting had reached her. Danielle didn't need to explain. "I didn't play the whole report," Danielle said softly. "I kept my promise." Clara nodded, her hands still clutching her gardening shears. "I know. I heard the recording of Leo's voice on the news." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were different from the frantic, pained tears of their last phone call. These were tears of grief, pure and unburdened. I hadn't heard him laugh in 10 years. They sat together on a stone bench overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the salt spray misting their faces. For the first time, they spoke of Leo not as a victim or a memory caught between two warring adults, but as the vibrant, funny, wonderful young man he had been. They shared stories, laughed through their tears, and mourned him together, finally free from the shadow of Richard's hatred. "He poisoned everything," Clara said, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "His own grief. My grief. Your memory of your friend. He couldn't let him go, so he held on to the hatred instead." "I'm sorry for the pain this brought back up for you," Danielle said. "Don't be," Clara replied, placing a hand on Danielle's. "You didn't bring the pain back. You just cleaned the wound. For all of us." As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the water, Danielle felt a sense of peace settle over her for the first time in a decade. The emptiness was still there, a space that would always be shaped like Leo. But it was no longer a void. It was just a quiet room, filled with memory and a shared, gentle sorrow. The war was finally over. Now, the long, slow work of healing could begin. Weeks melted into a month. The storm around Sterling Motors slowly subsided. The board, in a desperate act of damage control and genuine atonement, had made Danielle an extraordinary offer. They didn't just want to keep Carter Global as a client. They wanted her leadership. After extensive negotiations, a deal was struck. Carter Global Logistics formally acquired a controlling interest in Sterling Motors' North American division. Danielle Carter, the woman who had been deemed unworthy of even entering their showroom, was now its new majority shareholder. Her first act was not one of retribution. There were no mass firings, no sweeping purges. The culture of fear Richard had created dissolved on its own. Instead, she called an all-hands meeting, broadcast to every dealership in the country. She didn't speak of the past. She spoke of the future. Her final announcement was the one that mattered most. "Effective today," she declared, her voice echoing in the same boardroom where she had won her battle. "We are launching the Leo Island Foundation, funded by a 1% tithe of Sterling's North American profits. The foundation will provide full scholarships and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth who dream of becoming automotive engineers and designers. It will be a legacy of opportunity, built from the ashes of tragedy." The final scene unfolded 6 months later, at the Foundation's inaugural launch event, held not in an opulent ballroom, but in the gleaming, redesigned lobby of the Manhattan showroom. The space had been transformed. It was brighter, more open, more welcoming. The air of exclusionary stuffiness was gone, replaced by a buzz of excitement and hope. The first class of scholarship recipients, a diverse group of brilliant, wide-eyed teenagers from all over the country, mingled with top Sterling engineers. Danielle moved through the crowd, her smile genuine and warm. She was approached by a hesitant Margaret Thompson, the sales associate from that fateful day. Margaret had been demoted to a back-office administrative role, but she had not been fired. She looked humbled, her former arrogance replaced by a quiet shame. "Ms. Carter," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to say, I am so deeply sorry for my behavior that day. There's no excuse for it. I was wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." Danielle looked at her, and, for the first time, saw not an accomplice, but a person who had made a terrible mistake and was trying to atone for it. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, her voice kind. "I accept your apology. The most important thing is what we learn from our mistakes." As Margaret walked away, a weight Danielle hadn't even realized she was carrying lifted. Forgiveness, she understood, was the final act of letting go. She turned her attention back to the students. She saw their faces, alight with passion and ambition, in one young man's intense focus as he spoke to a lead designer. She saw a reflection of her own drive. In a young woman's joyous laughter, she heard an echo of Leo's. She had won, not in the boardroom, not with the evidence and the takedowns, but here, in this room, by turning her pain into a promise. She had not only vanquished her enemy, she had used the power she'd gained to build something beautiful and enduring in his place, something that would honor her friend's memory in a way no victory in battle ever could. The final surprise was not for the world, but for herself. It was a quiet, profound realization that dawned on her as she looked out at the future she was now building. The emptiness she had felt after her victory was gone, filled not with the satisfaction of revenge, but with the deep, resonant joy of creation. True power, she finally understood, wasn't about tearing down the world that hurt you. It was about having the strength, the grace, and the vision to build a better one.